Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. If you're working on coming up with some new licks or some new ideas for your vocabulary, then sometimes it's really useful if you take a step back and try to look at it from a completely different angle. In this video, I have 10 examples that I'm going to go over. I'm going to talk about the basic concept behind how the lick is constructed, not really the specifics about what note goes on what chord, but more about what's the idea behind making the melody. Hopefully there's something in here that you find inspiring, and of course if you have a great idea that I'm not talking about, then please leave a comment, because it's really useful to have a lot of these ideas. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes or checking out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The idea behind this first lick is to take a part of the line that I'm playing on the D minor 7 and then move that into the G7, so that it's both coming up with material on the G7 and also connecting the two, because I have this small motif that's moving. So here what I'm doing is I'm first playing the D minor 7 arpeggio and then this quarter arpeggio that I can then just shift up for the G7, and then I continue with another quarter arpeggio and resolve that. So the idea is that I'm just trying to take the last part of what I'm playing on the D minor 7 and then shift that or move that in some way up to make something on the G7. Another way of doing this is of course also just to take the whole D minor 7 line and then make a G7 line out of that. That could be something like this. Here I'm using the same D minor 7 line, so still just the D minor arpeggio and the quarter arpeggio, and then I'm moving that by just taking the A flat minor major arpeggio on the G7 altered, and then another quarter arpeggio from E flat, and then resolving that. Sometimes it can be really useful if you decide to give a certain movement to the melody that you're playing. So in this example I made a 2-5-1 lick and it's moving up all the time. And the reason for that is that a 2-5-1 is a cadence and it kind of naturally wants to go down. So you kind of hear moving down all the time. And then when you have this movement through the D minor 7 and then going on the G7 altered, it keeps on moving up and then resolving. And that can be a nice thing to work with, to just say, well, I want to move in a certain direction when I'm playing on this progression, and try to use that to come up with some new material. Another bonus for this is also that you actually get quite a large range on your lines and you don't get stuck in the same register all the time, which can add some nice variation to your lines as well. One of the things that you have to make sure that you add to your lines, especially if you're playing a lot of 8-note lines, is dynamics. So the dynamics in an 8-note lines usually just means that you have to accent certain notes. And it's really the accents that breathe life into the line and makes it interesting to listen to, and not just some sort of machine that's turned on. So in this line, what I'm doing is that I'm playing around with some accents on the 2-5-1, and I'm actually moving a rhythmical figure around. And if you can check out the accents, you can also kind of tell what kind of figure that is. So the line is using really a very simple construction, because it's the same thing that I'm playing 3 times in a row, and then I'm just fitting it to the chords. So that's this figure. And then I'm adding to the high notes here, I'm adding accents. And on the C7, I'm then changing 2 notes to fit it on the C7. But the pattern really stays the same, and then I resolve it. Most of the time when we're working with arpeggios, then they're only up to 4 notes. So we're working with triads, or maybe some quarter arpeggios that are only 3-note structures, or we're working with 7th chord arpeggios and they're 4 notes. And then if we want to add an extension, then we're just going to take an arpeggio from another degree in the chord. So we're going to use the arpeggio from the 3rd or the 5th. But you can actually use arpeggios with extensions, and you can get some really great lines out of it. Just check out what Wes Montgomery does, because he does this really a lot. And I think the thing that you have to sort of overcome with this is that we're used to thinking of the arpeggios as being sort of really flexible, that we can play them in several octaves and do a lot of different patterns with them. And that's a little bit more difficult with the extended arpeggios, but they're actually easy to access, and they're also really worthwhile just using once in a while. In this line, I'm using 2 arpeggios with extensions, one at the beginning and one at the end of the line. So the first one is the G minor 7 with a 9, so that's this one. And then at the end of the line, I resolve to F major 7, and then I sort of tag it with this F major 7 with a 9. Chromaticism is such a big part of the jazz language, especially after bebop. And if you're looking for new ideas, it can be really useful to just go check if you can find a new sort of chromatic enclosure or some other sort of sound where you're using some passing notes that you can add to your playing, or something that you're not using that much. That's at least something I do quite often. In this example, what I'm doing is really simple because it's on a B flat 7, and I'm just using different chromatic enclosures to target chord tones within the line. So the first one is targeting the F, so that's, and then a little bit later I have one targeting the 3rd, and that's, and then at the high point of the line I actually also have a chromatic approach to the root, which is just sort of going from the 9th chromatically down to the root. And I think this is a really nice way to create a little bit of variation, and it certainly also is almost instant bebop when you start using this. I think we sometimes forget that we actually have diatonic triads and diatonic 7th chords on all the notes of a scale, and you can really use all of them on a chord. Of course, some of them will work better than others, and you have to be a little bit careful with how you use some of them, but it is worthwhile starting to check if there's something that you're not using that much, and if there's something that's a little bit vague, maybe see if you can find a way to use it so that it still works, because in that way you can use all the things that you already practiced in a different way and put it to use on a chord where you normally wouldn't use it. So in this example, I'm doing a little bit of that. I'm starting with an A minor 7 arpeggio. So A minor 7 on a D minor 7 chord is not that clear. It sounds more like a D sus, but when we then sort of combine it with an F major triad, or especially just anything with an F in it, then it very clearly becomes something that sounds like a D minor. So that's what I'm using here. On the G7, so that's a G7 altered. And luckily in melodic minor you can use most of the diatonic chords and you can get them all pretty much to work. Sometimes you'll need to add a note or two in the rest of the line, but really it's a lot easier to work with melodic minor as a sound than it is with major, because there are a little bit fewer notes that you need to be careful with how they sound on top of the chord. So in this case I'm using a B major 7 sharp 5 and then combining that with a D flat major triad like this. A thing that I really like to work with is playing across the bar line. So in this example I'm doing that by not playing 4 beats of D minor, 4 beats of G7 and then 8 beats of C major, but instead I'm playing first 3 beats of D minor, then on the 4 on the D minor bar I'm really clearly changing to the G7 altered by playing a D flat, and then I'm actually extending the G7 into the bar of C major and not resolving until it's on the 2 end. So this way of thinking, where you're playing melodies that don't exactly fit in the bar, are really good because that creates some extra tension, and if your melodies are strong enough, then it's still going to sound like a logical movement, and then you're just going to have a few places where it sort of creates a little bit of extra tension and creates a little bit of extra surprising sound as well, which I really like a lot. If you want to check out people who do this, then probably you want to check out somebody like Bill Evans, who does this quite often. Lately I've been really listening a lot to the first Jim Hall album, where he's playing trio with Rhythmical and Carl Perkins, so it's with bass and piano. And what I really like about this album is that he doesn't play a lot of 8-note lines that are really dense. He actually has a lot of rhythms and he has a lot of space in what he's playing. And this line here is, I'm not sure if it's an exact transcription of what he does, because I didn't check it out like that. I just sort of imitated it. The idea is really simple, that we have a repeating figure that moves in the bar, and I'm only using a few notes, and then I'm using a lot of sort of syncopated rhythm. And that's something that's also worthwhile checking out. And I think it's something that we forget because we're too busy sort of spelling out the chords and getting all the right extensions in there. What he does is really simple. It's a little bit as if he's changed the harmonic rhythm in the 2/5. So now I have it here as a 1 bar of G minor, 1 bar of C7, and then to F. And the way he plays, to me, it sounds a little bit like he's playing G minor, C7, G minor, C7, and then resolving. Because that's a little bit the nature of the line. Another thing is that the rhythmical motif that he's using is actually 3 beats long, and then he repeats it. So it changes and it's displaced within the bar. That's also something that you can work with that's really useful and really powerful, even if you play it as just complete 8-note lines. So the idea is just to use really the 7th and the 3rd, and then for the G minor and the 7th and the 3rd for the C7, and then just make an interesting rhythm with it. And then resolve that to the F major 7. The blues is of course a huge part of jazz, and we can actually also use it in some funny places once in a while and still get away with it. So if you listen to Joe Pass, for instance, he'll play blues, well, pretty much on any chord in a major key, and especially on the major 7 it will work, even though it should really be clashing. But because it's the blues, then we just still accept it as being a sound on top of the other sound, and we think it sounds fine. And that's also a little bit what I'm playing with here, because I have a 2-5-1 in the key of G major, and I'm actually using the blues, so G blues sound, but I'm using it on the D7, and I'm kind of using it as an altered D7 sound. So the first part of the line is really just clearly A minor 7, pretty bland, and then on the D7 I'm using this sound, which is really all like G blues, really with the blue note and all, and it's really about the phrasing, and then I resolve that on the G major 7 to get a different sound. And that's something that's very worthwhile experimenting with, where you can use the blues, also just because it gives you a completely different sound than what you expect if you're just really sticking with the chords. Jazz, and especially if you're talking about hard bop and bebop, is mostly based on 8th note rhythms. And I think we can actually also get a lot out of using other subdivisions once in a while. Of course, when we're using other subdivisions, then usually we're going to be using subdivisions that are faster than the 8th notes. And that means that you probably don't want to do this in tempo 250, and it's more something that you want to experiment with and really use when you're playing more of a medium tempo. And that's also the example that I have here. So what I'm doing is I'm playing a 2-5-1 on a really sort of slow medium swing in C, and all the rhythms in there are really triplet rhythms. So I'm not playing anything that really sounds like 8 notes. Everything is really just thinking in this other subdivision, and that means that I can play some rhythms that are maybe not directly in the groove. They still kind of fit, and you can also do some interesting things by grouping them together in 4 notes at a time, which is what I'm doing on the G7 altered. So that's also something that's really worthwhile checking out. Working like this, when you're sort of stepping back and trying to look at the larger context and have another way of starting your lines than just thinking about it's this chord and this arpeggio and I need to use these target notes, can be really useful. I think it can open up for understanding the larger context of your solo, and that's going to make it more interesting because you start thinking about, well, did I use triplets already? Was I playing this arpeggio all the time in this way? And not only thinking about, well, if it fits on the A minor 7, then it's great, because that's just too detailed and it's going to make your solo boring, or at least there's a big chance that your solo is going to get boring because you're not thinking about what you played in the last chorus. So if you have an idea like this, then please leave it in a comment and share it with the rest of us, because that would be really useful, and I'm sure everybody who's checking it out will also appreciate that. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and it's the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding some solid methods and good strategies for checking out all the interesting things about jazz guitar and improvising. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and it's because of that that I can keep on publishing videos every week. if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.